In the quiet moments before the world wakes up, there's a place where pain meets peace, where every breath feels like a prayer and grief stands still. We carry the weight of what was and search for meaning in the smallest things. And sometimes all it takes is one moment to remind us we're still here, still healing.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Griever Let's Talk About It podcast. You guys know who it is. This is Tony Lynch. I'm the host of this podcast, and yes, we are your number one podcast for bringing you stories around death, dying, and grief. All the messiness that comes in between with some amazing people out here doing some amazing things, changing people's lives one heartbeat at a time. Now, if this is your first time tuning in, do me a favor, head on over to their YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell notification, so you'll be notified every time that we drop a new episode. And one other thing, this is for educational purposes only. Now, without further ado, guys, help me welcome my next guest to the show, Shaleem. Hi, Shaleem, how you doing?
Hey, Tony, man, it's great to see you. I'm doing good.
Oh, man, ever since our last conversation, I've been really excited to have this conversation and share your story and your work with the audience and everything. So before we get started, introduce yourself to the audience. So tell people who you are, where you're from, about the work that you do.
Yeah, Tony, thanks for having me here today. My name is Shaleem Dzon. I'm a registered nurse, certified grief counselor. I'm an author of one grief book that published last year, and I've got two more children's books around the subject of grief coming, one this year and one next year. And all that being said, I'm a fellow griever, which is what has put me into, this line of work and to podcasts like yourself. So, we wouldn't all choose it, but my grief story, it started the night that my husband died of cancer, and we were newlyweds. We were so in love. It shattered my world, took me into totally new territory than I'd ever been in. And I wrote the first poem the night that he died, and I could still see myself sitting there by the fire. It was the biggest snowstorm in the history of Portland, and it was cold. It was January, and I knew I wasn't going to be able to talk at his memorial. I cried so much for so long. So that poem went, on his memorial pamphlet as my words. And I just started writing. And I wasn't really writing for anybody. I was just writing for my own sanity. Honestly, it was just my own journaling. I was typing out stuff on my notes on my phone and just trying to honestly figure myself out. I mean, I think that's something that happens with grief is we have to begin to comprehend ourselves, right? So, and that takes some time to figure out, because we have to figure out like who we are now without this amputation, this part of yourself that's gone. And, I felt like, my favorite part of me was we. And so, when my husband died, my favorite parts were gone. And honestly, I was a miserable version of myself. I was sad. I was crying all the time. I was angry and just, yeah. So I started writing, and that writing just chronicled my experience as I did a deep dive into, I think, these bigger questions we ask when we go through grief, like, honestly, what's the purpose of life with all this suffering, right? You find love and then they're gone, and you got to go on. So I wrote for probably about the first year and a half until I scattered my husband's ashes on this high mountain place that's called Illumination Rock, and that was one of his deathbed wishes. We were backcountry skiers, telemark skiers, and Mount Hood was our favorite mountain. And yeah, he wanted his ashes and his black lab before ours, Marley's ashes, we'd never done anything with, scattered, from this beautiful place up there called Illumination Rock. And And then he said, I can still see the look in his eyes. He said, and then when our dog Digby dies, you can scatter his ashes there too. And I got to tell you, the day I scattered Brad's ashes up there on that mountain was the second hardest day of my life up to that point. It's just hard to let the ashes go, man. I don't know if you've had to do that, but first the ashes were in an urn in the bedroom, right? And then in the living room, and eventually I put them out in the garden because I knew one day they were going, they're going into the wind and into the high mountain air. And plus it's just a physically arduous trip up there too. It's like miles steep up this mountain. So, yeah, my writing changed after that. I kind of, at about 3 years out, like started dating again, or at least trying. Or I wrote about those experiences of kind of this wildly optimistic hope I had, and realizing that the world is full of broken people. And I was now one of them. And it didn't work out for me. And I wrote about moving halfway across the country. I live in Arkansas now. And then the experience of when our dog Digby, 6 years later, 2 days shy of the exact day that Brad died. Digby died, and whoo, he was my best friend at that point, that dog. And honestly, I think he saved my life. He really gave me a reason to live and a reason to smile again. And I was praying to God. I didn't want to have to face that day alone. I was praying to God to give me somebody to lean on when Digby died. And I came to realize, is probably you have too, Tony. Sometimes we have to face the things we most fear. And that was I felt more alone that day than I ever have when Digby died. But I was depressed. I went into a pretty sad place. But then I knew I had this mission. I was going to have to get myself back up and go back up that mountain. And we can think ourselves into a really dark place, but we can't think ourselves out. We have to
you're gonna have to fight yourself. You're gonna have to fight your way back out of there. Which leads me to one of the hardest questions that I had to ask myself as I maneuvered this world of grief, right, and trying to figure everything out. What's the biggest thing that you wish somebody would have told you about the grieving process?
About the grieving process. I mean, I think, that changes early on. Really all I wanted anybody to say was just, I'm sorry for your suffering. Cause I felt like I was in a torture chamber, and anybody who tried to say anything that would like lighten it or comfort me, it didn't. I was like, would you say that if you knew that I was on fire? Cause that's how it feels, and then so at first that was all that I think, to be validated that this is, an extreme experience of suffering. And then as time went on, the dialogue that I started to tell myself, and that I think, I found in the books that I read, and turned to some of those spiritual masters who did speak to me, was that we have to find a purpose in the suffering. And in fact, that we're on a soul journey, and our souls don't grow when things are easy. So they grow when things are hard. And so we, it's a sacred opportunity, even though it's very difficult to, go deep inside yourself and see who you are. What's your true essence and character, and can you mold that into a better version of yourself? So, I think that I had gathered a lot of those tools, Tony, going through what I had thought was a deep dive into grief, honestly, after losing my husband and my dog. And then, the rest of the story is that shortly after Digby died, I did fall in love. I met this great guy, and one of our very first conversations was around this trip I was going to take halfway across the country and go back up to Illumination Rock with Digby's ashes, and he was all in. And so we took that road trip together, and he made that attempt with me. And his name was Bentley, and he suffered a a fatal cardiac arrest. And he died up there on that mountain that day. So, yeah, he was 53 years old, and it was very shocking. And I came down that mountain a different person. I had a whole new level of grief and trauma that, oh man, I didn't think that's how my life was going to turn out, and we have to be okay with the life we're living. So I had some tools already. Like, I knew the writing helped, and the poetry, and time alone in nature helped, and action helps. And we have to feel it to heal it. We can't run away from that wound, man. We got to dive right into it. As messy as it is, as hard as it is, you can't skirt around it. So, yeah, I lost my mind a little bit after Bentley died. I went and just spent, time sleeping in the back of my truck in wild places in Idaho and in Oregon, and just getting right with God, getting right with myself, and doing all this writing. So I knew it wasn't going to be easy, right? At that point, you kind of know, like, it's kind of the rest of your life, and there's no quick fix, and you just got to take one step at a time, and each day as it comes, and face it and feel it. So
we're gonna talk more about that. We have some questions. We have some comments and questions coming in on the comment section. Mr. 20%, salute out there, brother. Thank you for tuning in. Being able to deal with the pain is the first step to healing. Yes. Like you said, Shaleem, you have to feel it to heal it, right?
And it's painful. Yeah, it's painful. Nobody can take that pain away from you, man. You got to just be with it.
Yeah. And I tried to describe this pain to someone, and I told them, I said, look, the type of pain that I'm in, it's not a physical pain, but it's so deep inside of me that it doesn't go anywhere. It's in everything that I do. It's in, when I look at things, it's when I breathe, it's when I move, it's when, it's everything. It's a part of who I am. And it's so numbing that it empties you out, right? And then you have to reclaim bits and pieces of yourself that comes out through that. Right?
Oh, 100%.
And that's the type of pain that it is, because you're always redefining who you are, right? 100%. You're learning another level of knowledge that we can in turn into tools and apply to the things that we go through, because every time it changes, a new trigger forms, right? And so now you have to learn all of that. So it's a forever thing, right? And there is good things that happen to it. Sometimes those triggers can be very good. They can be very bad, but that all depends on how you allow your grief to change you, and what you're willing to give up in order to receive the other side of it. We got another comment or question. This one comes from Catherine M. What's one step someone can take today to support themselves or a loved one through grief?
Yeah, I mean, to support yourself, I just have to say, I know everybody says it, but be kind to yourself, because it's arduous. It's a hard journey, and I think we can sometimes feel like we should be further along or a little bit more healed or processed than we are. And the truth is, where we're at is just where we're at. And it is what it is. And some days will be better than others, but yeah, I mean, as a grief counselor, I've seen that for some people, that second year of grief is actually harder than the first, and so, yeah, you can tell yourself, all right, just get through this first year and it'll get better. And then you get into the second year and you realize, like, man, I'm not doing well. Maybe I'm even doing worse than I was. And Tim Challies wrote a book after his son died, and he talks about that analogy, I think, really well, where they're carrying pails of water from where they can fill it up at the cemetery so they can keep the grass green on his son's grave. And he said at first when you start carrying those gallons of water, they don't feel so heavy, but about halfway to the grave, you got to stop and take a rest. And that second half of the journey, they feel heavier. And that sometimes grief can be that way. Like the longer we carry it, the harder it is. And so, yeah, I just think that, just allow that place of grace, of just wherever you're at, just it's really okay. So sometimes surviving is just enough, right? Just getting through that day.
I learned that was one of the things, one of many things that I learned. So when it came to myself, I realized that it had revealed more than what I really expected it to do. Like the things that that I never talked about, it made me really face it and hold myself accountable for some of the choices that I made that probably wasn't the best thing. Although I thought that they were, I thought that I was right, but apparently I wasn't. I was, and then realize, right, because you watch people, you go, well, they're doing it this way. Maybe I should do it that way. And then you realize that it doesn't work. But it's the figuring out what works for you type thing, right? And that's the hardest part because not everything is going to work. But at some point, you can use everything, right? And so I love the diversity of that, right?
Oh, totally. Yeah, there's no one size fits all version to grief, and yeah, I mean, for myself, like after Brad died, my husband, I would have never killed myself, but I was really questioning like the purpose of staying alive. I mean, I would have died for him, I loved him that much. And so I went to the library and just got a whole stack of prisoner of war, stories, biographies and autobiographies from World War II. And because I thought, what makes somebody want to survive something that just, there's so much suffering, you could just die and it would be over with. Like what gives you that spark that says survive no matter what, and after reading all these incredible stories of suffering that, it just made me feel so grateful to have like a hot shower and a clean bed and food to eat and just all the niceness that I had in my life, because obviously they didn't have any of that. I 100% came out of that with like, what made each of them survive was different. There was no one formula, and we have to find our reason, right? We have to find our reason, and then obviously it goes beyond just surviving to thriving, and that's when we know we've turned a corner. We've made it, some progress in our grief, and now we're engaging with the world again in a meaningful way. We're engaging with our passions again. We're smiling again, right? And that's a really important step of just that healing journey and proof that you've done a lot of the work and you've come a long way.
Yeah, and it's amazing. Like once you really start to go through it and you really understand what it's trying to give you. Sometimes I don't know if it makes it easier to accept or does it make it a challenge, especially if you're so used to controlling things, right? So that also depends on the individual as well. I want to answer the other side of the question that Catherine put up there. Then we're going to get into some more of the comments that was put up in the comment section. This one, I cast Mr. 20%. He's another brother of mine. Salute out there to you, my brother. He says, when I lost my little brother and sister, it left a big hole in my chest. And I still haven't grieved for it properly yet because I push it back down. But that's how he deals with the pain. I want to first start off and say, it's not as uncommon as what people think to want to push down the pain. We're finding that not only men do it, but women do it as well for fear of not understanding how to survive or even navigate that sort of pain. So we don't do what our bodies naturally requires us to do, which is to grieve, because if you love that person or those individuals, it's only respectful to give them that release. Because when you talk it back down, and I could be totally wrong, this is just a theory, but when you talk it back down, you tend to not want to let go. And you mentioned something in the beginning of spreading ashes and things like that, right? And what I realized, and I did have to do it, I had to do it with my son.
Yeah.
Hardest thing that I can ever do.
Yeah.
But I knew it was necessary and I knew that it was time. And what I realized what it didn't take away the pain, but it helped me to release the hold that I had, to be able to say, hey, thank you for the time that you spent with me, but I really would like you to go because I can't go on like this.
Yeah.
Right. And so it helped me just to release just a little bit more.
Yeah.
Of that, you know.
Yeah. 100%, you know, and I think, you know, talking about like, you know, what grief is the experience that we have when, you know, we go through losing who or what we love. But, you know, in the world of like grief counselors, we talk about mourning is being the work of grief, right? Like you have to like actively do some stuff to like move along that journey. And you know, even when people are doing active stuff, they can get stuck. They can get stuck in ruminating, where they're just constantly thinking about the person, or they're constantly thinking about the circumstances of the death. Sometimes that happens as well. And, you know, a really great author, Martin Prechtel, he says that grief is praise. And he does a much better job of explaining that than me. But I think, you know, for those of us who feel like I haven't cried enough, or I haven't, you know, done some sort of special memorial or commemoration, or I just keep pushing it down, then I would say, you know, work with praise, you know, praise that brother that died, or that son that died, you know, because that is actually the flip side of grief. And because grief is just all that love, right, that we still have, that has nowhere to go. And so it doesn't have to look like, you know, like tears, especially if you've been carrying it a long time and have just gotten really, really good at pushing it down. It really could be something as beautiful as praise. And, you know, writing the things you love about them and tying it to a balloon and letting it float away, or, you know, putting it in a bottle in the ocean and tossing it in, something like that. You know, I think acts of commemoration are really poignant ways of working through the grief as well. And that's my first children's book that comes out this year. It teaches the word commemoration to, it's got a grieving seagull, you know, and he meets some friends along the way, an elephant seal and a sea turtle, and they have a commemoration for the grief. So it teaches them about commemoration. But, you know, commemoration can be something as simple as like taking a seashell to the shore, right? And then as we remember the ones that we adore. So it doesn't have to be complicated.
It doesn't. Which leads me to the next comment from Catherine M. And I love this comment right here. And they say, what are some common misconceptions about grief that you encounter? Oof.
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, a common misconception is that time will heal. We all hear that. And I do believe actually that eventually it does. But at the beginning, time feels like it's, you know, the foe, because it's taking you away from those happy days when they were alive and well, you know. And so at first, time doesn't heal at all. You know, time can feel like it's punishing. And, you know, really, it's only quite a long way down the line that you can look back and say, yeah, I've gotten better at carrying this burden of grief. You know, I've gotten better at smiling through the pain and accepting the circumstances, because like one of the really big things we have to do in our grief journey is accept. And boy, we can tell ourselves, I accepted it. I know that he's dead. You know, I was there at the funeral. I organized all of it and everything. I scattered the ashes. But, you know, if you're still bitter, if you're still angry, if you're still comparing yourself and looking around and saying, how come other people get to have their loved ones be alive and I don't? Then guess what? You still have some acceptance to do, because, you know, when you finally get to those deeper levels of acceptance, and I'm not sure that I'm totally done with it yet either, it'll probably raise its ugly head again. But yeah, you really truly have accepted that these are your life circumstances, beyond just the facts of the situation, but on those deeper emotional levels. So yeah, I think there's misconceptions all along the way of like the stages of grief and what those are supposed to look like, right? What does your anger look like, your acceptance, and the sadness, and one thing that I see is that people feel guilty. They feel guilty when they feel some joy, right? So there's like, it's complicated. Grief comes with all these other things. Like, is it okay that I'm happier and I'm having a vacation, and this person's gone? And so I think, like you said, it takes you to these deeper stratums in ourselves. And so it really kind of depends on who we are, what are our attachment styles, right? What were our childhood experiences? How important was this person in your life? All of those things are going to really dictate how that grief is for you. And so I've had people say that they thought they understood grief, right? I think C.S. Lewis even writes this in his book about grief defines. Like, he thought he understood it until like he had an earth-shattering grief. For some people it's their dog dying. For some people it's their horse dying. Some people it's a family member dying. Some people, honestly, it's a divorce. I just talked to somebody recently who felt guilty telling me this, but he was like, I was there when my dad died and it was really hard, but going through a divorce with this woman that I love is a worse grief for me, And so I say, you know what? The worst kind of grief is the one that's worse for you. And you don't have to feel guilty if one of those griefs is harder than the other. That's just the one that's hardest for you. And that's life now really teaching you about grief. And so then you can have compassion for other people that are going through grief that you may not have even understood, like how, like you said, it's such a core wound. It's such a core thing. There's no getting away from it. It's this constant companion when it really is one of those more profound, devastating losses, And so it's hard to understand that until you've kind of experienced it.
Well, and you touched on a few of them. I want to add to what you were saying. There's a couple misconceptions that I want to address. The stages of grief. Throw that out the window. Throw it out the window. And the reason why I say that, because those stages of grief, they become great pillars. But as you go through the process, you will begin to add things into your grieving process. Things like sorrow, frustration, anxiety. This is all part of grief, right? So. And you're going to come up with a number that works for you, right? I've known people to get up to 47. I've known people to get up to 60 something, right? But it's interesting because this is yours. This is yours. You're going to cater your process to what you need from it, right? So and that's why we often say there's no blueprint for it. We can also come up with formulas to help you navigate what you're going through. Universal truths that we figured out during the grieving process. Things that work with millions of other people, and you can focus on those different things. Another one, and this is the hardest one that I've seen people struggle with the most. The people that you love the most are going to be the ones that walk away from you first. And it's not personal. It is not personal, right? People will see a version of you. If you've been a strong person in your family, people will often look at you as the strong person. So when you're going through something and it affects you in a more deeper emotional way, people sometimes don't know how to deal with that. They don't understand that your world is turned upside down. So they will do and say things to get you back to the old version of you. That way, they don't have to feel guilty of not knowing how to support you. So you really have to take that into consideration as well.
Yeah, there's so
Another
much
thing.
collateral damage,
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. There's a
Yeah,
lot of collateral damage that goes
yeah,
along with that, right? Because on the other end, you're trying to figure out your life from that point on, and your life is going to change, right? So you can go ahead and just start to accept that your life is going to change, the way that you see things, people, places, things, the way that you smell, or even talk to people is going to change because now you're going off of the reality of that person or these people are not in your life anymore, right? So you have to adjust everything around to that new reality.
Mhm.
Um, and the rest of it is you have to be willing to relinquish the old version of yourself. So you are going to be changing a lot along with that. In
Absolutely.
your journey, this is something that's always interests me because I know how many versions of me I had to get rid of before I became who I am today, and I'm still shedding old versions of
Oh
me
yeah.
as I grow. Right, as I grow into this role of being a men's grief coach. How many versions of yourself did you have to shed before you became who you are sitting in front of us today?
Gosh, like it's like an onion. I mean, you just peel one away and then the next and the next. Because I mean, I think that, there's sometimes there's trauma involved, right? It gets a little bit complicated when, with the grief, watching the person that you love dies, that there's some trauma involved as well. And so, yeah, I think that, as you start to face your triggers and just realize even all the brokenness that you had been carrying up into that point, but it was kind of buried, right? It was under, like, you built your house on this nice grassy knoll, and then the landslide came, and it's not just that your house is gone and the grassy knoll is gone, it just strips you right down to, like, the bones of who you are. And
It
sometimes there's stuff
does.
there that you haven't looked at, right? There's like old angers and things you haven't forgiven, maybe stuff you didn't even remember. And so, it forces you to change in such a fundamental way. I think I couldn't even name how many versions of myself, but I would just say that, eventually you start to realize, like, you have a choice. You will be changed by this experience. You will be changed. There's no going back to who you were. And so we don't have a choice that we're going to change, but we do have a choice in, like, how we change. Right. And so that's where,
Yes.
I talk about, like, we're on the path of the diamond. And so diamonds are it's a chunk of coal, right? But it's under extreme heat and extreme pressure. And over a lot of time, it turns into this crystal clear, hardest substance we have on the planet, the most tightly packed nucleuses of anything else that we know of on the earth. And, it just goes through this radical transformation, and it becomes really valuable and totally beautiful, right? And hard, and clear. And so, we're on the path of the diamond. And are we going to let all of this pressure and heat and stress turn us into just charcoal dust, or are we going to let it transform us, which really is an opportunity? When you go through these hardships, you don't get to turn into a diamond any other way. And so when you start to see the hardships, the adversities, the sufferings truly as an opportunity for soul growth, and that's where I had to get, I had to get beyond feeling sorry for myself and all this other stuff. And especially after Bentley died, I really, really realized, like, yeah, uh, I have to choose. I have got to choose. And then, like, you think of some heroes along the way, right? People who do choose the hardest path, right? Like, I remember, I was reading about that story, the Endurance. Shackleton, he tried to reach the North Pole, right before World War II, and their ship got frozen in the iceberg, and man, those guys survived like a year or something crazy out there in the Arctic. But the story goes that when they had to abandon the ship and now they were on the iceberg, like they had some really good sleeping bags that were from like the Eskimo tribes made out of fur. And then they had some not so good sleeping bags, right? And the men all drew straws to see who was going to get the good sleeping bags. And Shackleton and all the captains, all the upper men, they all got the short straws, right? So they all got the bad sleeping bags. And everybody knew that they rigged it that way. So Shackleton was the kind of guy who would never want somebody to suffer more than he would. He was the leader, he was the captain, and he was going to take the lion's share of the suffering. And I can remember being out there in the woods of Idaho and just like being like, how can I become that kind of person? Could I raise my hands to the sky and say, like, give me the short end of the stick, let me suffer, not, as much as anybody ever has, and let me grow through that experience. And yeah, so we kind of have these, these moments of saying, like, I take it in the chin and stand back up and take it again.
I like that. Here's a comment. So the goal is to become translucent and tough to gain clarity. That's such a tricky question.
Well, I wouldn't say it's to gain clarity, but I appreciate that. I'm not to argue. I mean, I think that that's true. But one of my signature sayings, and it comes from a poem I wrote, is that perhaps, after all, a broken heart is like a broken mirror with more places to reflect the light. Mm. And so it's not our light. It's not our light. I believe there is a greater light. And rather than just one surface, now we have this shattered surface, and our hearts have become, diamond-like. And so, yeah, we're reflecting a greater light. And I think that to me, that's the ultimate goal of being a diamond.
Yeah. And I want to add to what you're saying and everything, because as I read it, I started to think, yes, the answers that you come up with will be the answers that work for you.
Yeah.
Right. And being translucent and tough is a result, right? That's like a finished product. Who are you going to become, after you go through the hardest moments, right? The hardest challenges during your process of grief, and whoever you decide to become, that's going to be the form of your diamond. And yes, it's going to be translucent, it's going to be tough and things like that. But there's another side to it. Look at what it took for you to get there. So if a human being was to walk around tough all the time, it would destroy that person, because you're not supposed to be tough all the time, right?
No, the Buddhists talk about, you want your mind to be a diamond and then your heart to be like a lotus flower blooming.
Right.
So no, it has to be both. Like wisdom and discernment, that's what they talk about with the diamond mind. You have wisdom and discernment, not necessarily toughness, maybe mental toughness, but in our heart, we want compassion and kindness. Yeah, we want softness there. So you're absolutely right. It's both. And so we want our heart to blossom and bloom out of that mud, right? Out of the muck, out of that, that swamp of what our suffering has been, that something beautiful would arise.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about, it's the yin and yang of things, right? You can't have one without the other.
No, absolutely not. Yeah.
Fully detached from everything. You have to make a plan not to meet anybody in your life. If you do and are privileged enough to find people in your life that care about you and you care about them, the process of grief is going to be inevitable. Now, it's what you and it's how you show up for others, something similar. Because remember, everything that to you is a reflection of you, right? So if you don't like the way someone shows up, ask yourself, how are you showing up during the grieving process as well, right? It should be an experience. Grief is to be experienced, right? It's a truth that most people don't really understand, because you can't see grief. You have to express your grief, right? And sometimes it may not look ideal to understand what that process is like at that moment. And so, you know, I think that's what I love about the many, many avenues of grief, and everything that it has to offer. I always find fascinating as well. Now, when did you decide to put your book out?
So I'd been writing for, 6 years, and just putting it on notes on my phone. And when I came back after Bentley died, I got a grief counselor. I got a therapist, and he was one of my biggest fans of my writing. And he said, do you have all these together in one place? And I didn't. So he's like, you got to get all these together in a Word document. And so I did. And that really got me through that first year of grief. I had a mission, which was great. Well, like, let me compile everything that I'd written over these years. And when I did, I had way too much for a book. I had twice as much as what wound up in my book, but there was a lot of material there. And I realized, like, in fact, it's not just, oh, woe is me, or I'll miss you forever. Like, you could actually watch in the course of my writing that there was growth, that there was deep soul reflection, that there was healing, and that there were moments of insight. There were these moments of illumination that came from the experience that was a journey. Yeah. And so that's at that point, then I decided, I think I have a story here, and it's written in poetry and prose. I can share a couple of my poems with you. It's not going to appeal to everybody, but for the people who have read it, they're the ones that God put it in their heart to read it, and they needed it for a reason. And it's a very honest reflection. It wasn't written for an audience, and so it was just written for me. I never thought that it would turn into a book, and so it's extremely authentic in that way. And I think even as I was writing it, there's this kind of like objective, subjective thing going on, like, who is the writer and who is the reader? And because it was all just for me at the time. And I think that's something that we have to do when we're going through grief. It feels so very personal. It's so subjective because it's our life story. But if we can begin to look at it from the outside, in and become a little bit objective with it. And I think that the writer's voice helped me to do that, helped me to kind of see it from the outside in, and, begin to make sense of it, because certain parts of your brain can kind of shut down. It can be hard to even find words for what you're going through with the grief. Right. So
that's very true.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was a very healing experience. And then going through that, I decided and realized that this little voice in me was saying, God has prepared you for this path, that I would go ahead and get the certification to become a grief counselor and start helping other people as well. Yeah.
I love that. We got a comment up here from Catherine M. And this is a very, this comment right here is very common when people are very hesitant, or they've gone through a bad experience with someone in the grief field. Unfortunately, these things do happen. And so the comment goes, for someone listening who may be hesitant to reach out for grief counseling, what would you want them to know about the process?
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yes,
that's a great question. I mean, I think I had some bad experiences, so I totally understand that there is hesitation. I mean, I think there's an innate sense of knowing inside of yourself that nobody can take that pain away, right? And so they can witness your process, they can give you some tools in the process, but you have to do the work. Nobody can do that for you. And so, I think the hesitation, I would just say, give it a try. Try to find, you definitely want to find somebody that you vibe with. You feel like, that they care about what you're talking about, that they have some reference points in their own life to understand the depths of what you're going through, that they have some tools and ways of talking about it that you hadn't thought about before, and so just give it a go. You may have to you may have to shop around a little bit. I tried group therapy. I tried a couple of them, and I was too raw and too angry, and I stormed out of there, and it wasn't a good fit, And so don't lose hope if you're finding like that you're just not finding that right connection. For me, like if the person had the wrong expression on their face, if they were too happy, toxic positivity can be something that kind of steps into the grief world. And yeah, we have to be, aware that like, yes, there's an incredible opportunity for transformation and to become a better version of yourself and all that other stuff. But yeah, it's not like, oh, this is a positive experience. This is a truly difficult experience that nobody would choose. And so for me also, like figuring out like what your definition of grief is. I think some people, that would be one of my first questions when I was interviewing counselors, like, what's your definition of grief? And if they're just like, they go on and on, we all have grief and there's all this collective grief and generational grief and on and on and on, like that's totally fine. That just wasn't going to be my counselor. They can run ceremonies for other people, but for me, like I have a very specific definition of grief, which is losing who or what we love. And so not getting what you want or having all this generational grief and stuff like that, that's just that's just in a different paradigm than what I was looking for. And so I think getting clear with what your definition of grief is and making sure they're on the right page too. Yeah,
I agree with you, and also recommend people taking baby steps. Right, find you some support groups on Facebook. See what those support groups offer.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be afraid of, like you said, Shaleem. Don't be afraid to bounce around until you find what you want, and you may do that throughout the first process.
Mm-hmm.
Before you go to a counselor, make sure you trust yourself enough to be honest with that counselor.
Yeah.
Right. And make sure that you're in a place to where you're ready for the process that goes on. So.
Yeah. At the early stages, I don't think you're ready. I think you need to wait a certain amount of time.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it goes back to the expectation. Everybody wants a quick fix, right? There's no quick fix for it. That's why I said take some baby steps, right?
Yeah.
Do some online groups, something that you can talk to people with. See what the group offers. Seeing if these groups fit your needs, right? Like, what are you looking for? Those are the things that you have to do because this is your process, right? And so it needs to be catered to what you need and not what other people tell you that you need. So
totally. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Taking that time to do that, right? And following the process and until you're comfortable, until you're really comfortable. As we begin to wrap this up, Shaleem, I only have a couple more questions for you. First question would be, how can people find you?
My website is illuminationgriefcounseling.com. That would probably be the easiest place, but you can also find me on social media just under my name, Shaleem Dzon, or illuminationgriefcounseling.com. So I do a lot of live poetry on social media, talk about grief, also talk about, my life. You can get kind of a glimpse of, I'm a mountain bike coach and very passionate about mountain biking as well. So a friend recently said I should start a TikTok channel where I was the mountain biking grief counselor because I get a lot of interest. I get a little interest in the mountain biking. I do too. But yeah, if you come to my site, you're going to find a lot of grief. Some of the poetry from my book, but I've continued to write. I write on a very regular basis, and so you'll hear. You'll just get you'll get a very authentic view of who I am out there, and some of my deeper thoughts on grief that come out through the poetry and prose.
I love that.
Yeah. So I'd love to share. I'd love to share.
Please.
Yeah, share a poem here. And you had talked about like just like viewing things through all these different fragments, and that's a kaleidoscope, a viewpoint, a kaleidoscope is one that came up a lot in my poetry. And so this one's called A Kaleidoscope of Memory. And so it seems our lives are not defined by joy alone, but by the magnitude of loved ones lost, whose memories glow bright like specks of gold, cast to the sky by winds or caught. We can hold our loved ones for a moment's golden splendor, but time will move that moment on. The mind, a kaleidoscope of fragmented pieces of hopes and dreams and laughter's song. Yet, in the kaleidoscope of memory, sits the heartbreak in the future lack. Though joy would bring the heart to glory, the loyal heart just wants them back. So
I love that.
thank you.
That.
Yeah.
And, so I got 2 more questions for you. My next question would be, if Shaleem had a superpower, what would it be?
I would bring back the dead. I mean, come on. I just said that the loyal heart just wants them back. Yeah. Unfortunately, that's, yeah, I'll never lose that. Love is forever. Love is forever. And of course, I have a very strong faith that I will see my loved ones again when I pass over. So, but people have asked me that before, and I keep trying to come up with another answer, maybe a magic wand that would take people's pain away. But yeah, selfishly.
Nice. And my final question, if you could leave the audience with something today, what would you leave them with?
I think just connect. It's such an isolating thing to go through really hard grief. Tony, like you said, you're going to lose your friends and family. They're going to get uncomfortable with the pain you're in, and they're going to want to see you healed a lot faster than, you're going to be able to heal. And so they'll, all of that stuff. And so it can be an incredibly isolating experience. And there's a lot of richness in that solitude. If we can turn that loneliness into solitude, there's some deep stuff that happens there. And I need my solitude. I think a lot of people who go through hardcore grief do, but that's different than isolation. And when we feel isolated, we can get into a really very dark and hard place. And so whatever that connection looks like for you, whether it's nature, whether it's your animal, whether it's just another human or a support group, whether it's the moon at night, connect. We have to connect. I think that's the most important part. And so, it's not always a built-in recipe. We don't always have that person to go to get a hug. I had somebody tell me like, you need to cry in somebody's arms. And I was like, I don't have anybody's arms to cry in. Like, that is just simply not a reality for me. So yeah, you're telling me I have to do something that I can't. That made me feel worse. And so, I remember having a good friend say, if you don't have a human or an animal, connect with your houseplants. And at the time I was like angry. I was like, are you serious? Like, you have a husband and, all these wonderful things. You want me to connect in with my houseplant? But I got to tell you, after my dog died, I was glad to have those houseplants. And so, yeah, sometimes it can be very, very humble, but we need to connect, and ultimately to be able to connect back in, to that web of life and connect back in with humanity. And if you can connect back in a way that gives, then it helps you to find a sense of purpose in your suffering. And, there's a famous quote by Solzhenitsyn, who did like 5 years or 8 years in a Russian gulag. And he said, my biggest fear is just to not be worthy of my suffering. Right. And so when we go through these hard sufferings, what does that mean to be worthy of it? It's like to, grow from the experience and then find a sense of meaning or purpose in that experience, and then, give back in a way that connects.
Love that. I love that. And with that being said, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this episode of the Griever Let's Talk About It podcast. Everybody, Catherine, she's in the chat. Thank you for tuning in, chat, Catherine, because she put one up there. She put a comment up there that said, "Can never underestimate the power of connection," and she was just thanking us both for this powerful episode.
Thank you,
So thank you for tuning in as well. Thank you for everyone who has been tuning in into the chats on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, as well as Instagram. I did say that, and on YouTube. So thank you guys for tuning in. And Catherine's information, Shaleem's information is in the YouTube channel subscription description. Go there and check her out. Catherine, you must have been on my mind. So yeah, thank you for sharing your thoughts with me today.
Thank you, Tony, for having me today. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, most definitely. It's definitely been a pleasure. It's been a great conversation. We'd love to have you on again. For everyone else, if this is your first time and you have not already done so, do me a favor, head on over to that YouTube channel, hit the subscribe button, hit that bell notification so you'll be notified every time we drop a new episode. But maybe these conversations aren't for you just yet, but maybe you know someone who can benefit from it. Do me a favor, share this along with them. We're trying to reach as many people as we can to help normalize these conversations around grief, dying, and everything that comes in between it, so people feel more comfortable about asking for the help that they not only need but deserve. With that being said, again, thank my guest, Shaleem, for being here today. I am Tony Lynch. We're going to see you guys in the next one. As always, if you're not, go out and spend time with your family. Create good memories because tomorrow's not promised. All right? Love you guys. And we're going to see you guys in the next one. Have a great day.
Thank you.